Hey everyone, this is Mike of the Comic Book Trove. It's been a little while, but I'm back today with another review, and today I'm going to be taking a look at the Guardians of the Galaxy by Brian Michael Bendis Omnibus Volume 1. This is the recently reprinted version of this book, which came out a month or so ago, so recently at the time of recording this. And it's a book I've just recently read through as well, so it's still pretty fresh in my memory. And with that in mind, I wanted to take the opportunity today to cover this book, do a bit of an overview of the omnibus itself, and discuss some of the material in here, and share my thoughts, because this is certainly an interesting run, this Guardians run by Brian Michael Bendis. And there's a few things I'd like to say about it. Before we dive in and take a look at the book, though, and get to that discussion, we'll just have a look at the dust jacket here, featuring the standard variant cover, the one I went for here. I think this is a great piece of artwork, featuring the whole team. There's a spine image as well, which on this particular dust cover, you get Rocket Raccoon down there on the bottom of the spine. You get a different character, I think, for the other two dust jackets. There were 3 covers in total. And then on the back, you get this bit of blurb at the top there, which gives you a bit of information about what's covered in here. And down there as well, you get the full material collected in this book. So quite a bit of stuff in here. It's the full 2014 series of Guardians, which is probably just over half of Bendis' run on this series in total. There would be enough material to collect a second volume. There's never been a second volume of this, but with this having been reprinted, perhaps that material will be collected before too long, we never know. On this hardcover itself, got to say I really love this image as well, with this whole team lineup here. Everybody looking great, really cool piece of artwork. And the artwork is something that stands out as being mostly very strong throughout the material in this book. That's something that I will praise. And as we start to look through it, of course, I'll show off examples of that. So we get, like I say, the full 2014 series of Guardians in here. Prior to that launching, there were 8 issues of a series called Avengers Assemble, which kind of sets up the beginning of the ongoing Guardians series in here. And yeah, so it's quite an interesting start to the book, because for a while you are just reading an Avengers story. It was written by Bendis. The artwork in this Avengers miniseries is by Mark Bagley. So, being an Ultimate Spider-Man fan, it was cool to see these two reunited here. You know, very nostalgic for me. Had some great kind of flashbacks to Ultimate Spider-Man. Unfortunately, the story here is not quite on that level, but nevertheless, a cool pairing. Good to see them working together. So this story then is, you know, it's okay. It's not amazing, this Avengers story, but it gets things going. What starts to happen basically is we get the build-up to an appearance by Thanos. Shortly after Thanos turns up, the Guardians follow suit and they arrive on the scene and start working together with the Avengers to take him down. So the book certainly starts off on quite a dramatic note. You know, straight off the bat we're fighting Thanos, you know, high stakes from the beginning. But what I will say is the story here, not just for this Avengers series, but, you know, as we move further into the Guardians series, as it really gets going, it's not amazing in my opinion. I've got to say, like, it has its moments, it definitely has its moments, but there are a couple of things that hold it back from actually being really great in my opinion. One thing, like I say, though, that is not an issue for me is the artwork, especially the artwork once we get into the main Guardians series, which starts here. Not with this particular issue, but soon enough we see artwork by Sara Pichelli, who, again, you know, another collaborator with Brian Michael Bendis, she being the artist who co-created Miles Morales with him. But yeah, so we start off here with this issue 0.1, which is a bit of a recap of Peter Quill's origin, showing him as a kid, and how he kind of ended up in space. I should probably give a spoiler warning here before I go any further. Kind of forgot to mention that already. But yeah, so the issue here showcasing how Peter Quill's mum sadly died when aliens attacked him because of who Peter's dad is. So here in this series, in the comics, Peter's dad is an emperor, Emperor Jason of the Spartax Empire. And yeah, that's something that starts to cause issues, because basically he does not get along with his dad. His dad's a bit of a tyrant. But what we see here is the familiar lineup of Guardians now as we know them, and as they are well known as of the MCU bringing these characters onto the screen and making them pretty much household names at this point in time. And although this isn't the first ongoing series to feature this iteration of the Guardians team, because that came in 2008, I believe, with the Dan Abnett and Andy Lanning series. That is a fan favourite series, and one that kind of inspired the 2014 film. What happens here with this series is we start to see the comic version of these characters start to resemble the film version of the characters more and more. Something that I think was clearly done quite deliberately. If you're a fan of the film version, if the James Gunn movies, you know, with Chris Pratt and everybody else, then you will probably enjoy these versions of the characters for the most part. I am a fan of the films. I think, you know, many people are. So it was pretty cool to see Guardians resembling those versions of the characters in the comics, but something about it just doesn't quite work all that well in this run. I don't think that these characters are particularly well suited to Bendis' writing style. There are just a few issues of dialogue choices and issues I think that he tends to have with defining these characters' personalities. Just things that don't quite work in, you know, as you read through it, to the point where it doesn't feel as natural and free-flowing of the dialogue as it did, for example, when you know, you're reading through something like Ultimate Spider-Man or other top runs by Bendis, things like Alias or Daredevil. This is not a run that I can rank up there with the likes of those. One thing that doesn't help it is that it keeps being interrupted by crossover stories. So there's a point about midway through here where it gets caught up in an X-Men storyline, the trial of Jean Grey. And then there's another event towards the end of the book as well. One thing that does happen in here that doesn't happen initially, so I imagine this was quite confusing for people who read the book at the time, because as of the end of the Abnett and Lanning run that took place before this, I won't spoil that, but something happened that kind of made it seem as though these characters were certainly gone for the time being, you know, for the foreseeable future. And as of the beginning of this series, they're just all kind of back and everything seems to be normal again, and it isn't until quite far into this run, in this particular book, that you get an explanation for how they got out of that situation. I don't think it's a particularly great explanation for that either, you know, it's just something that seems like they did it because they had to explain it somehow. It's like people were asking and they kind of didn't want to bother with an explanation, but then they sort of had to do it, and it seems a bit half-hearted. That's the impression I kind of got reading it. We get this character here introduced. Should probably talk about her, Angela. Quite interesting that she came over into the Marvel Universe. She was originally an Image Comics character created by Todd McFarlane and Neil Gaiman, I believe. And that was a whole thing there between those two and trying to figure out the rights to that character. But basically, one thing led to another and the character rights were sold to Marvel. She debuted in the Marvel Universe in this Guardians series as a member of the team for a while. And again, it's not really a natural fit. It's not a character who really seems to work in this series. And I think that this series only has its moments where it's kind of fun, where we actually get what seems to be just a brief issue or two here or there, where the Guardians are kind of allowed to do their own thing and the story is allowed to breathe a little bit. But before anything really gets a chance to develop too far, they end up being brought back into another story. So they end up here being brought into this X-Men story, as I mentioned, the trial of Jean Grey, which is a bit of a weird story anyway, because this is an odd point in X-Men history where the original Silver Age young version of the X-Men were brought forward in time. So the deal here is that even though it hasn't happened to her yet, the whole Dark Phoenix saga is referenced and brought into the story because the Shi'ar Empire want to basically try Jean Grey for the crimes she committed as Dark Phoenix, even though this version of Jean Grey hasn't committed those crimes yet because it's something she would possibly do in her future. It's a bit of a mess, not a great story in my opinion. It's an odd thing that they did, and bringing the Guardians into it again just means that this series can't really do its own thing. One thing that does kind of come out of it, to be fair, and I suppose it's the main reason as to why they did the crossover in the first place, is that this a relationship starts to develop between Peter Quill and Kitty Pryde. They have a kind of long-distance space relationship for a while before, towards the very end, she does join up with the team. And that's okay, you know, it's kind of a fun, kind of quirky, kind of sweet relationship between those two, but I don't know. I didn't think it was all that amazing, really. Angela, again, we see her in scenes here. She does have quite a fun dynamic with Gamora. These two kind of badass ladies teaming up, and they go on little missions of their own a couple of times throughout here, and just kind of take down, almost taking down armies single-handedly between them. It's pretty cool, but it's just moments like that, moments that shine through, fun moments that are allowed to appear now and then before something else kind of drags the series back. And I don't know. This is one that I have a tough time recommending. If you are a big Guardians of the Galaxy fan from just watching the movies, for example, if you haven't had a lot of exposure to the characters in the comics, I don't know how much you would enjoy this particular run of characters, on the characters, I mean. I don't know. It was a bit of a slog to read through some of it. I wish I had a better time than I did. As I said, the artwork, though, was always great to see. Some examples of really fantastic artwork by Sara Pichelli in particular. I think she did a great job. We do get the bit towards the end here where Flash Thompson, who was Venom at this point in time, or Agent Venom specifically, joins up with the team. There are a couple of fairly brief appearances by Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel. And towards the end of the run, one thing that is actually quite cool when it does happen is Peter Quill kind of manages to inspire a revolution against his dad, the sort of evil emperor, or at least the corrupt emperor. So his dad gets kind of taken out of power, and Peter Quill finds himself in a situation where he is now kind of in demand to take his dad's place, something he's reluctant to do, but kind of goes and does it anyway. But this is an event here as well. This really breaks up the flow of the series when you get to this Black Vortex event. Not an event I'm really familiar with. I've never read the whole thing, but this only collects parts of it, and then you get a few pages like this that summarize what was going on in the comics elsewhere, because you'll be jumping from, for example, chapter 2 here, and then because you don't get the full event, you jump ahead to chapter 7, or whatever it is that comes next. So there's big chunks of this story missing, and it means that when you're just reading the Guardians issues here, as they're collected in this book, you might as well not read them. That's kind of the way I felt about it, because you're not getting a complete story. It doesn't really make sense to even read it like this. It's really ruined the ending of the book, because this comes right towards the end, and you've got to say it made for quite an anticlimactic ending to the whole thing, really. Really mixed feelings about this one, honestly, guys. I don't know kind of how highly I can recommend this. As I say, it's something that if you do really want to check the comics out, it's probably worth looking at, but I don't know if I'd recommend going for the Omnibus unless you've already read this before and know that you enjoyed it. As it is, it might be better to collect it in another form, a cheaper format, or read it digitally on Marvel Unlimited, for example. Because I don't know about this one. I overall preferred I think the Abnett and Lanning series is a stronger run on these characters. And I haven't read a whole lot of Guardians actually that takes place after this. I've read a bit of the run beyond this by Bendis, where next thing that happens in what would be a volume 2 is where Kitty Pryde temporarily takes Peter Quill's place as Star-Lord. She takes on the mantle of Star-Lord, and she's leading the team for a while. I've read a bit of that run. Didn't really enjoy that too much either, I've got to be honest. But beyond that, haven't read a lot of Guardians. It would actually be pretty cool if anybody could recommend what are the best Guardians runs from recent years, or the best comics in which these characters appear. There is a really cool collection of variant covers in the back, got to say that, by a whole variety of artists. Some of these are really particularly good. This is a really cool one by Milo Manjara. Some of the stuff in here by Mark Brooks. There's Terry Dodson there. Yeah, just some really cool covers. But as I say, the book itself, I don't know. This wasn't for me. This wasn't the definitive version of these characters, certainly, I can say that. Overall, I had an okay time reading this, but I will say that the story is really kind of forgettable. Definitely not one of Bendis' best runs. In fact, probably one of his weaker runs. But I would be really interested to hear the thoughts of others as well. If you've checked out this run by Bendis on Guardians before, do you agree with me, feel that it was a little bit of a misfire, or perhaps you really liked it? Either way, would be very keen to hear people's thoughts. I'm always interested to hear the thoughts of others. But anyway, thanks as always for sticking with me and watching through this review here. Appreciate that as always. I'll be back again soon to discuss something else.